Hi, good to see you at the start of lesson 7. In this lesson we'll talk a bit further about user accounts. We'll explore how to work with user accounts that are made available through an LDAP directory server, which facilitates the central management of user accounts as well as the authentication process. You'll not only learn how to set up authentication against an LDAP server, but you will also learn how to make home directories available in a centralized way by using auto-mount and NFS. As for the topics in this lesson, external services are required. I'll also introduce you to my classroom server, which is available online. You'll set up authentication of a test user account against this managed and monitored server. This will help you get going with these topics in the most efficient way. As in all other lessons, at the end of the lesson we'll review the essential topics in the end of lesson exercise. In this lesson you will learn how to use LDAP. LDAP provides an easy way for a centralized authentication server. And it is easy to hook up many computers on one LDAP server so that you have to create your user accounts once only. In this lesson you are going to learn how to connect your server to an LDAP server, which means that you are going to configure the client and not the server. But before doing so, it is useful to know a little bit about what you are connecting to. So what is LDAP? LDAP stands for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, and it connects you to a directory server. And this directory server is hierarchical in its setup. And that means that it looks a little bit like DNS. Let's take a DNS name like server.rhatcertification.com. That means we have a top-level domain with the name com. We have a subdomain with the name rhatcertification, and we have a leaf object with the name server. Now LDAP is pretty much mirroring DNS structure. So in LDAP you could have something like lisa.rhatcertification.com. But in LDAP we don't write it that way. This is the DNS way of writing it. In LDAP we have a notation that is pretty particular. So the notation would be for everything that is a container like a domain object, it would be DC. So DC equals com, DC equals rhatcertification. And for leaf objects it would be CN, which stands for common name. So instead of writing lisa.rhatcertification.com in LDAP, that would be CN equals lisa separated by a comma, not a dot, DC equals rhatcertification and another comma, and then DC equals com. Now when working with LDAP, there can be different domains that are available in your setup. What is very important when setting up the connection to an LDAP directory server is what we call the base context. The base context is like the search domain in DNS. It's the starting point where your client should look for objects, like user objects. So if you are going to connect your server to my LDAP server, you are going to use DC equals rhatcertification, DC equals com as the base context. And that is very useful because without the base context, users would need to log in with names like CN equals lisa, DC equals rhatcertification, DC equals com. You can imagine that your users are not going to like that. And that is why you are setting up a base context. Because based on the base context, you can use just the username. So for the user it doesn't change anything logging into an LDAP server. For you it does, because if you manage multiple Linux servers, it means that you have to create your user accounts just once and not many times. So now that you know about the composition of an LDAP directory, we can have a look at the authentication process. In order to do that, I'm first doing which on login to find the binary bin login, which is a binary that is used when a user connects to anything, if a user wants to authenticate. So this binary is using library files, And in order to find the library files that the binary is using, I'm doing LDD on bin login. And what we can see here is the PAM library. You can just consider this a plugin on the login command that adds some functionality to this login command. And in PAM, well, PAM stands for Pluggable Authentication Modules. It's an authentication module. And the authentication module is listed in the etc pam.d directory, where we have configuration files for the different processes that relate to authentication. So here we can see the configuration file for login. Now, if you have a look at the configuration file for login, you can see the definition of what exactly needs to be happening when your system starts up. And the important part here is the auth substack system auth file. So the system auth file is a common definition of the login procedure for any process that has to do anything related to user authentication. So we should have a look at the system-auth file to find what exactly is happening. And here we see that it's becoming interesting. So first, we have the line auth sufficient pam_unix.so, which tells the login process to look at the local authentication mechanism. And if that is successful, well, then it is sufficient for the user to authenticate. If this is not successful, it continues and it will go through whatever is defined in pam_ldap.so, which means that the login process is contacting an LDAP server and trying to find out if the user account exists in LDAP. And this is basically how the local programs get awareness of external authentication mechanisms, such as LDAP. So let's resume all this in a slide. We have a user, Lisa, that wants to log in. So the login process is calling the libpam.so file, which is the library that adds PAM awareness. And in PAM, well, the authentication process finds this line of requisite pam_ldap.so. And next, based on the definition of the pam_ldap.so, the LDAP configuration file is read. And the name of this configuration file is etc nslcd.conf, and in this file there's a line that is identifying the LDAP server that is going to be used. So the URI of the LDAP server is ldap://server.rhatcert.com. By the way, rhatcert.com is a short version of rhatcertification.com, which is the classroom server that you are going to use in this section as well. And next, the client is able to connect to the LDAP server, where there's an LDAP hierarchy that the client can use to log into.
We will now set up the server for authentication with LDAP. So there are different utilities to set up a server for external authentication. There's the authconfig utilities, which is a command line interface and a text user interface. But there's also a graphical interface. And the graphical interface is probably the easiest to use. So let's install it. There we go. There's Y, because we don't want to do any confirmation. Now, to set up LDAP, we also need some additional packages. The first of them is the NSCD. That's the Name Services Cache Daemon. It is the part of the operating system that caches information from external authentication mechanisms on the local machine. So that is very useful. We also want NSS-PAM-LDAP-D. This is the part that sets up a local name resolution and local authentication and connects it to LDAP services. And then there's PAM_LDAP, which is really the libraries that are needed to make local authentication aware of LDAP. You really need all these, and if you don't install them right now, well, you have to do it later anyway. So at this point we're good to go, and we can launch off config, which is the GTK, the graphical interface. If you don't like graphical interfaces, that's fine, just replace GTK with TUI, but I would recommend to use GTK on the exam because it's so easy to set up, and yeah, it's not so easy if you use the text user interface. So the first thing you need to do is specify what user account database you want to use. By default it is local accounts only, and we want to set that to LDAP. Now this error is not really something to take serious. This is related to Kerberos authentication. We're not going to use Kerberos authentication, but I do want the package to be complete, so I'm clicking install anyway. Kerberos authentication, by the way, is something that we'll get back in the RHCE course and not in the RHCSA course. But it's better to have the software complete anyway. So let's first change this to LDAP password, which makes it a little bit simpler. Next we need the LDAP search base DN. This is something your LDAP provider is gonna give you. In this course we are using RHAT certification, DC is com. Remember, LDAP uses domain components which are like DNS domains, but you have to use a type specification and a comma as a separator between them. Next we need the LDAP server name. Now this is very important to be aware that you need something that matches the TLS certificate that we are going to receive on the client. So basically IP addresses don't work. What does work is the name of a server, and the server I'm going to use here is server.rhatcertification.com. The reason why this really has to be a server name is because it has to match the name of the name that is used in the certificate. And a certificate typically has one name only, and that's a name and not an IP address. Of course, in theory it would be possible to create an additional certificate that works with an IP address, but that really doesn't make sense. So next we are going to specify that we want to use TLS to encrypt connections. This is important because if you don't use TLS and you do use LDAP passwords, the LDAP passwords are sent unencrypted over the wire, and that is something you really don't want to have. So we do a download certificate, and we are going to do that from ftp:/server.rhatcertification.com/pub/slapd.pem. And next we can click apply to apply everything. It takes a while, but that is normal. So you just have to be patient here. So to test, I'm going to log in as an LDAP user. My LDAP user is LDAP user 5. I have LDAP users 1 up to LDAP user 5, and I can use no matter which of them to test the authentication. Now this is good, even if it doesn't look good. We can just ignore the errors, we are going to fix them later, but for now if you just type ID, you can see that the current user ID is LDAP user 5, and LDAP user 5 is really a user that doesn't exist in the local etc pass WD file. So let's do a grep LDAP user 5 on etc pass WD. We don't have him here, but we can work as LDAP user 5. Even if he doesn't have a home directory, we can create a file in the TMP directory and check the owners of the file. So that is how you set up LDAP authentication. And by the way, in this course you are using my server, which is waiting on the internet to help you with that. I will explain it when you're doing the exercise.
So in a previous demonstration, you have seen that LDAP authentication is set up properly, but the LDAP user doesn't have a home directory. And we need to take care of the home directory problem right now. In order to mount the home directory from somewhere, we are going to use AutoMount. AutoMount is a system that makes a connection to a server that is offering access to the home directories, which in this case is an NFS server. So let's have a look at how it works. This explanation consists of two parts. I first want you to have a generic idea of how AutoMount is used to get access to a specific directory that is somewhere else. And in the next presentation, I'm going to show you how AutoMount is used in the context where you want to automate access to home directories. And then I will demonstrate everything on the screen, and you should be good with AutoMount. So imagine that AutoMount is active on the system and a user wants to do cd/data/files. Now, in this situation, if /data is monitored by the AutoMount process, there would be a file with the name etc auto.master. And in the auto.master, there's a definition of the /data directory, which is monitored by using the /etc/auto.data file. That is what we call an indirect file. So auto.master only identifies the /data directory as an AutoMount directory, and everything else is defined in the auto.data file. And if you look in the auto.data file, you can see what is happening once we are in the data directory. So we have files here, we have data here. So if a user is doing cd/data/files, these are matched together. So files is a subdirectory of /data. So if anyone in the data directory is trying to access files subdirectory, we need to do an NFS mount. And the NFS mount is a read-write mount to a server with the name NFS server :/data. And at the moment that the directory is accessed, this mount is used automatically. So what is happening next? Well, it's very simple. AutoMount takes care of performing the NFS mount for you. I will show you in my later demonstration also how this is working on the command line. And this completes the AutoMount for the /data/files directory. So a user is trying to access /data/files, and in the background all this is happening to make this access complete. And the user won't even be aware, but at the moment that he is in the /data/files directory, he will actually be working on the NFS server that is offering access to this directory. So let's look how this all works if you want to do an AutoMount of home directories for the LDAP users. The first thing that you would need is a server that is offering access to the shared home directories. That can be an NFS server or a Samba server. In the example environment that I created for this course, I'm using Samba. Samba is a bit more complicated, but it's the only thing that works over the internet. If you want to use NFS to provide access to shared home directories, it needs to be on a local network, and NFS is not going to work on the internet. So that is why I'm doing a little bit complicated here, and I'm using another protocol than NFS. In my next presentation, I will also explain how to do it with NFS, and that is what you need to know for the exam. But it doesn't harm if you know how to do it the difficult way. You will only find it easier using the NFS protocol. So the /home/guest directory is the directory that we want to use for AutoMount, because the LDAP user has in his user properties his home directory specified as /home/guest/LDAP user1, for example. So at the moment that the LDAP user is logging in, there is going to be a system call to go to the home guests directory. So AutoFS will wake up, and it will find in the auto.master file that there's a specification of /home/guests, and if anyone wants to go there, well, we should have a look in the etc auto.guests file. And in this file you can see the specification of what is supposed to happen. So if someone goes to *, which is any directory in home guests, like LDAP user 1 or LDAP user 2 or whoever is trying to access his home directory, as long as it is in /home/guests. There is going to be a CIFS mount, and the CIFS mount needs a couple of mount options, and that is the part that starts here with -fs type and goes all the way through the end of the line that finishes with password. So in order to do the mount, we need the fs type equals CIFS, we need the username equals LDAP user, and the password equals password. And with these mount options, we can do a mount to the CIFS server, server.rhett-certification.com/data/ampersand. The idea of what is happening in auto.guests is about asterisk and ampersand. Asterisk and ampersand are the matching items. So what does it mean? Well, it means that if someone needs access to /home/guests/LDAP user 1, asterisk is substituted with LDAP user 1, and the matching item is looked for on the server, which is in /data/LDAP user 1 in this example. And that would create the mount for the LDAP user coming from the server that is on the internet. And the result is that on login of the LDAP user will go to his home directory.
To set up AutoMount, you first need to install the AutoMount service, which is in the AutoFS package. From this package, you will get a couple of configuration files. As you should by now understand, the main configuration file is auto.master. So what I'm going to set up now is a situation where connection to the home directories for my LDAP users is taken care of automatically. To do that, I need to specify that the home directories, which are all under the home guests directory, they are being taken care of by using the etc auto.guests file. You can choose whatever name of the file you want, but I would recommend to have it start with auto because it just makes more sense. So the important thing is the contents of this etc auto.guests file. In the first position, I'll put a star, which means anything. Now, if you have to do this on the exam, then typically you will use an NFS server. But as I have just explained, in my test environment where connections are going over the internet, NFS isn't supported. NFS is for local networks, period. So on the exam, it would look like *-RW to make it a read-write mount, followed by NFS server or whatever the name of the NFS server is, followed by /home/guests, which is the name of the directory that is shared on the NFS server. So this is what you have to do on the exam, but you have to add one important thing, and that's the ampersand. The ampersand matches the star in the beginning of the line. So if the beginning of the line is LDAP user 1, when LDAP user 1 logs in, an NFS mount will be created to NFS server /home/guest/ampersand. But again, I don't have all that here, so I need to do something else. And the good news is that you don't have to do this on the exam. It's a little bit complicated, but hey, if you can work with complicated stuff, you can handle the easy stuff that you'll get on the exam as well. So what I need to do is star again, which matches anything, followed by fs type equals CIFS, which goes to a Samba mount. This is the file system that is compatible with the Windows operating system. So let me type all the other parameters before explaining them to you. There we go. So basically the structure of the file is the same as when doing auto mount on anything else. So there's which directory of the auto mounted directory do we need to take care of? Well, this is just anything. And then we have a list of mount options. Which is fs type equals sys, that tells auto mount that it's a Samba server, and then we have username equals LDAP users, password equals password. I have completely opened the share to all LDAP users, and I've taken care of security on the local file system where the NFS is exported. Next we need to specify what the mount should connect to. So it starts with colon followed by the UNC path for the Samba server. Now you might want to know what exactly is behind it. Let's have a look at it. So here I have my share that is open to the server. This is a server that you are using in this course. So on this server I have created a configuration file that is etc samba smb.conf. And in the configuration file you can see I use the name data. So the thing between square brackets is the name as it will really be announced on the network. Then we have the comment, which is just anything, and most important, the path that is exported by this share. Public equals yes means that at the share level I don't care about security, but writable equals no, because hey, I'm offering this service over the internet, and you can understand that I would rather not see anyone writing to my share. So this is a Samba server sitting behind all this. Let's set up a small NFS environment. Yum search NFS will tell us what exactly we need. So what we need is nfs-utils to create a small NFS server. So yum install -y nfs-utils. That will install the NFS utils. Oh, it's already installed. By default it isn't, so you'll probably have to do this anyway if you want to set up an NFS server. And next I'm creating a file with the name etc exports. In here I'm defining what exactly I want to export. Let's say data with the mount options, RW, read write, to whom I want to open it, star, that means no restriction, so any IP address can access, but you should know that NFS works for local connected machines only anyway, so it's not a really big deal that I'm putting a star in here. RW, which means that we have read write access, and no root. Squash. As this is for my friends in the same network, I'm gonna allow that if the root user comes in, he gets complete access. So next thing I need to do, I need to start my NFS server. systemctl start NFS. Oops, did that fail on me? Wow, that is bad, but that can happen. So systemctl status -l will tell us what exactly happens. Aha, okay. Do you see how useful that is? I'm making a mistake, and hey, this was a real accident that I made this mistake, but systemctl status -l tells me exactly what is wrong. I just forgot to create this directory data. So let me make a directory data, and in this directory NFS file 1 and NFS file 2, and let me try to start the service again, which is better now. So I do have my NFS server here, and I'm going to show you how I can connect to the NFS server so that you also understand a little bit what is behind the auto mount that is offered in the exam environment. So first I'm using show mount -e on localhost. And this gives me the mounts that are exported on the server with the name localhost. I know that's the local machine, but I'm just pretending that it's an external machine because it doesn't change the idea. And I also want to show you how you can create the mount. So that's fairly easy as well. You just type name of the NFS server, / name of the shared directory, and then the mount point where you want to put it on. And if I go to this mount point now, I can see I have full access to this NFS server environment. Okay, let's do one more funny thing, and let's create an auto mount for that as well. So that would start in auto master again, and I am going to use a directory with the name NFS server. We manage it in etc auto.nfs server, and we'll create a file with the name auto.nfs server. So what exactly do we want? Well, we want that if someone goes to the directory blah within NFS server directory, we want a read-write mount to this remote host called localhost /data. And that really is all. You can easily recognize the elements that are used in an NFS mount if you type it from the command line as well. Before trying it out, I need to restart the AutoFS service, and I go to NFS server. Hey, did you see that? I didn't create the directory manually. AutoMount did that for me. Kind of cool, isn't it? And now let me first do an ls-a to show you that there's really nothing in it. But if I do cd blah, it takes me to the blah directory, which is an NFS mount. And this is basically all you need to know, and a bit more as well about AutoMount. A lot is happening when your system is connected to an LDAP server or any other source of external authentication. Most of the things that are involved are directed by the NSLCD process. Let's have a look. Systemctl status NSLCD tells us that the NSLCD service is enabled. So here's some service information, and we can see that it is, well, the name services LDAP client daemon. And this name services LDAP client daemon is the glue between local Linux services and the external LDAP server. For example, there is this file etc/nsswitch.conf. The idea of this file is that if you are an LDAP user, you need an identity, and this identity needs to be known to the local mechanism. nsswitch or nsswitch.conf is the configuration file that takes care of that. Let's have a look at what it looks like. So there is nsswitch.conf, and if you look here, you can see that passwd, which is password related information, basically user information, first has a look in files, then it has a look in SSS, a service that's no longer used in RHEL 7, and then it will have a look in LDAP. And when you see LDAP here, that means NSLCD. Now there's another part of the operating system that needs NSLCD, and that is PAM. PAM stands for Pluggable Authentication Modules, and it makes sure that the LDAP server is known to the authentication mechanism. Let's have a quick look. In the etc pam.d directory, you can see configuration files. These configuration files are used for anything that needs authentication and related services. In the login file, for example, you can see the definition of what exactly needs to happen when a user logs in. The most important file that is called here is system-auth. It is called by mainly all files if the PAM services are used. So in system-auth we can see that it tries to authenticate against an LDAP server. And again, to find that LDAP server, we need NSLCD. So NSLCD is very important. And it has some configuration. So in the etc directory, we will see the NSLCD.conf file. By the way, there is also an NSCD file. This has nothing to do with LDAP, so just forget about it. It's NSLCD that we need and nothing else. So what you can see here is basically the information that you have written when you used the config GTK utility. So you can see the URI in here that directs us to the LDAP server, the base context of the LDAP server, and anything else that's related to the LDAP server. Most of what you see here is commented out, but at the end we see two important parameters, and that is the SSL start TLS parameter and the TLS CA cert dir parameter. This TLS CA cert dir directive tells us where the certificate can be found. When you downloaded the certificate from config GTK, it was copied to this directory. If ever you need to do troubleshooting, well, you can go to the Open LDAP directory, and there's some additional configuration here. And the CA certs directory contains the certificate that was downloaded when you use the config utility. The utility just renamed it for you, but it's the same slapd.pem. Now this gives you some insight in what is happening behind the LDAP server. And because it can happen that things go wrong while setting up LDAP authentication, it really makes sense that you know how to find this information. So you can apply changes directly to the nslcd.conf file. You can also start the config-gtk utility again and apply the changes from there to fix whatever is going wrong. Also, don't forget to have a look at the var log messages file. At this point it's probably empty because we didn't see many LDAP related errors lately, but var log messages will show you what is going on if something goes wrong in relation to LDAP.
So let's have a look at the exercise. This exercise is a little bit a complicated exercise because you are going to use my server that is out there available on the internet. I created this server for you to make it easy to perform the LDAP exercises. So you need to connect your server to the LDAP server, which is server.rhatcertification.com. Once you have connected to this server, well, you can use the TLS certificate, which is available on ftp://server.rhatcertification.com/pub/slapd.pem. Just use the exact path as it is specified here, and your computer will be able to find it. Under the condition, of course, that your Red Hat machine is able to connect to the internet. You do need internet connection from your working environment, otherwise you cannot do this exercise. After specifying all the options to connect to the LDAP server, well, you can use the command su-LDAP user 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 to test connection to the LDAP server. I created 5 different LDAP users, so just pick one of them. And next you can use automount to connect the home directories using the Samba share at //server.rhatcertification.com/data. I know that's a difficult part, but you can see exactly in the slide presentation about automount what you should enter in order to do all this. So in this exercise you have learned 2 important things. You have learned how to connect your server to a central LDAP server, which is useful for managing user accounts centrally. And you have learned how to set up automount, which is useful as well, because you don't want to create a home directory on every single machine where your LDAP users are logging into. You just want to connect them to one central server that is providing access to those home directories. Make sure that you master these topics well on the exam, because they're on the objectives list and they are rather complicated. So make sure that you're ready to do all this on the exam. And don't forget, I have used CIFS in my explanation, That is just because of the limitations of offering an internet-enabled classroom server. You should be ready to do auto mount using NFS-provided home directories. So in this exercise you have learned two important things. You have learned how to connect your server to a central LDAP server, which is useful for managing user accounts centrally. And you have learned how to set up auto mount, which is useful as well, because you don't want to create a home directory on every single machine where your LDAP users are logging into. You just want to connect them to one central server that is providing access to those home directories. Make sure that you master these topics well on the exam, because they're on the objectives list and they are rather complicated. So make sure that you're ready to do all this on the exam. And don't forget, I have used CIFS in my explanation. That is just because of the limitations of offering an internet-enabled classroom server. You should be ready to do auto mount using NFS-provided home directories.